I refused to babysit my golden stepsister's kids, and my dad threatened to cut me off. So, my childhood? Yeah, it was pretty rough. I know a lot of people say that, but honestly, looking back, I don't know how I dealt with all of it. My parents split when I was 10, which was already a nightmare, but it got way worse after that. My dad, Brian, didn't stay single for long. Before I could even process the divorce, he was already seeing this woman named Susan. I remember when he first told me about her. He acted like it was no big deal, like, hey, I've met someone, we're serious. And then a few months later, boom, wedding bells. It was so fast. I don't even think I had time to really understand what was happening. One minute, it was just me and him, and the next, Susan was moving in. And suddenly I had a stepsister, Melissa, who was 2 years younger than me. Now I know what you're thinking. Great, a new family, right? Except it wasn't like that at all. From the moment they moved in, it felt like I didn't exist anymore. Melissa? She became the star of the show. It was almost like as soon as Susan and Melissa showed up, I was pushed to the side. My dad treated Melissa like she was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. And trust me, she knew it. Melissa was the type of person who always got her way. If she wanted something, my dad would bend over backward to get it for her. New clothes, trips to the mall, special dinners. Meanwhile, I was lucky if I got a good job when I brought home straight A's. It was like I wasn't even there most of the time. One time, I remember I asked my dad if we could go to this amusement park I loved. We hadn't done anything together in a while, and I thought maybe it'd be a good way to bond, you know? He said, maybe, which I thought was promising. But guess what? That same weekend, he took Melissa to some fancy art exhibit because she suddenly decided she was into painting. It didn't matter that we had plans. If Melissa wanted something, that was the priority. It wasn't just the little things either. My whole teenage years were spent watching Melissa get everything handed to her while I had to fend for myself. I can't even count how many times I asked my dad for help with something, only to hear, ask Susan, or why can't you be more like Melissa? That last one really stung. And it wasn't just my dad either. Susan was just as bad. She acted like Melissa was some sort of perfect angel who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I couldn't catch a break. If I did anything slightly wrong, like getting home late from school or leaving my room messy, Susan would act like it was the end of the world. But if Melissa did the same thing, no big deal. Oh, she's just expressing herself, Susan would say. It was so frustrating. The favoritism was real, and everyone knew it. I'd hear my friends say stuff like, wow, your stepsister really gets everything, huh? Yeah, no kidding. I was living it. But what really sucked was that no one in my family seemed to care. My dad would just shrug it off whenever I tried to bring it up. And Susan? She'd just give me some fake smile and say, we're all family here. Sure didn't feel like family to me. By the time I turned 16, I was pretty much done with all of it. Melissa had fully cemented herself as the golden child, and I'd come to accept that nothing I did was ever going to change that. I still tried, though. I tried talking to my dad about how I felt like I was being ignored. I remember sitting him down one night and telling him how much it hurt to see him always choosing Melissa over me. His response? He looked at me like I was being overdramatic and said, Melissa's had a tough time adjusting, Rachel. You need to be more patient. More patient? I'd been patient for 6 years, watching as my dad bent over backward for her while I was left to fend for myself. I just wanted him to understand how much it hurt, but he wasn't hearing it. So I started distancing myself. I figured if I wasn't going to get attention from my dad, I might as well stop trying. I focused on school, kept my head down, and made my own plans. By the time I graduated high school, I was ready to get out of there. College was my escape. I moved out at 18, and honestly, I was just relieved to get away from that house. It felt like a fresh start. I could finally live my life without constantly being compared to Melissa, or feeling like I didn't matter. I went to school, got my degree in graphic design, and landed a pretty good job in the same city. I didn't go back home much, just for holidays, and even then I kept things short. Melissa and I didn't talk, and I was okay with that. We weren't close, and I didn't see the point in pretending like we were. But then, a few months ago, everything started to change again. Melissa and her husband Ben moved to my city. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, yeah, it was a little weird that she was now living so close after years of basically no contact. But I figured whatever. Our lives don't have to intersect just because we're in the same place. A couple of weeks after they settled in, Melissa called me up and asked for a favor. She wanted me to help them get familiar with the area, show them around, maybe help with the move. And since I'm not a total jerk, I agreed. I mean, I didn't want to, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. So I took a few days and showed them around. Took them to some good neighborhoods, pointed out places they might like for groceries, schools, and all that stuff. It was fine. Awkward, but fine. After that, I thought I was done. Like, okay, I've helped, now we can go back to our own lives. Nope. About a week later, Melissa started texting me, asking for help with the kids. At first, it was small stuff. Hey, can you watch Olivia for an hour while I run to the store? Or, can you take Max for a bit so I can unpack? Stuff like that. I figured, okay, it's just temporary while they get settled, so I said yes. Then it started happening more. It went from once or twice a week to almost every day. And it wasn't just an hour here and there. She'd drop the kids off at my place for hours, and then I'd be stuck entertaining them while she was out doing who knows what. Now don't get me wrong, I love Olivia and Max. They're sweet kids, but I'm not exactly a kid person. And honestly, I'm not that great with kids. I never wanted to be someone's personal babysitter, you know? I have my own life. I work from home as a graphic designer, so I'm busy during the day, and by the time I'm done, I just want to relax. But instead of getting that time to myself, I was suddenly babysitting her kids almost every night. The worst part? She didn't even ask nicely after a while. It went from, "Hey, can you help out?" to just dropping the kids off at my door and leaving. Sometimes she wouldn't even tell me when she'd be back. I'd just be sitting there with two kids, trying to figure out how to keep them entertained, waiting for her to show up. It was so frustrating. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Moving to a new city with two young kids isn't easy. But then I realized she was just taking advantage of me. Like, if it was a real emergency, okay, I get it. But most of the time, it wasn't. She'd say she had errands to run, but I knew she was just meeting up with friends or doing stuff she could easily do with the kids. One day, I straight up told her, "Melissa, you need to hire a babysitter. I can't keep doing this." She just brushed me off like it wasn't a big deal. "It's just for a little while," she'd say. Or, "I don't trust anyone else with the kids yet." It was always something. And of course, she'd hit me with the "we're family" card, like that automatically made it okay for her to dump her kids on me whenever she felt like it. I was starting to get really pissed off, but I didn't want to start a huge fight. I kept thinking, okay, just ride it out. Maybe she'll back off. Spoiler, she didn't. One Friday night, things hit a breaking point. I had plans with my friends to celebrate Katie's promotion. It was a big deal, and I was really looking forward to it. I had told Melissa earlier that day that I couldn't babysit that night. I made it super clear. She said, no problem, so I thought, great, maybe this will finally give her a wake-up call. Fast forward to 6 p.m., I'm getting ready to head out the door when I hear a knock. I open it, and guess who's standing there with two kids? Yep, Melissa. She didn't even wait for me to say anything. She just hands me Olivia and Max, says something about being late, and rushes off. I didn't even have a chance to argue. I tried calling her, of course. Nothing. I called Ben too, but he didn't pick up either. So there I was, stuck with her kids, and my night was completely ruined. I was furious. I couldn't believe she had just completely ignored what I said. Like, she knew I had plans. I had told her. But she didn't care. I ended up texting my friends to let them know I wasn't coming, and I spent the rest of the night babysitting two kids who were already cranky and tired. When Melissa finally came back around 9 or 10 p.m., I was ready to explode. I told her this couldn't keep happening, that she needed to find someone else to help her out. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. We're family, she said again, like that was supposed to magically make everything okay. I told her straight up, Just because we're family doesn't mean I have to drop everything to help you. I have my own life too. She seemed shocked, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing up for myself. She got defensive, of course. Said I was being selfish, that I should be helping her out more because she's new in town and doesn't know anyone else. But I wasn't having it. I told her I wasn't her free babysitter and that if she needed help, she needed to hire someone. I think she expected me to back down or apologize, but I didn't. I was done being taken advantage of. I was done feeling like my time didn't matter. Melissa left in a huff, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But nope. Things were about to get even worse. A few days after I told Melissa off, I was just trying to get back to my normal routine, focus on work, and put the whole thing behind me. I wasn't looking to start any drama, but of course, drama came to find me anyway. It was a Thursday afternoon when Melissa called. She didn't even start with hello. Instead, she jumped straight to, "I can't believe how selfish you're being." Just like that. I didn't even get a chance to say anything before she started going off about how she needed me to help with the kids and how she was going through a rough time. I took a deep breath and told her, "Melissa, I already told you I can't babysit all the time. I have my own stuff to deal with." And I thought that was it. Like, end of conversation, right? Wrong. She started going on and on about how I should care more because we're family and how it's not fair for her to juggle everything on her own. At this point, I'm thinking, is she even hearing me? I tried once again to explain that I can't drop everything just because she needs someone to watch the kids. I told her it's not my responsibility and she needs to figure out her own childcare situation. You'd think she'd get it by now, but nope. Instead, she flips out and starts crying, saying I'm abandoning her when she needs help the most. It was like talking to a brick wall. And the worst part? After she hung up, I thought that was the end of it. But then my dad called. Now let me tell you something about my dad. He's always been kind of blind when it comes to Melissa. It's like she can do no wrong in his eyes. And I've always had to deal with being second best. But this phone call? This one took the cake. So my phone rings, and I see it's my dad. I figure he's calling to check in or something, maybe calm the situation down. But as soon as I pick up, I can tell from his tone that something's off. "Rachel," he says, "we need to talk about what's been going on with Melissa." I roll my eyes, already knowing where this is going. "Okay, what's up?" I say, trying to keep my cool. He immediately jumps in, saying how upset Melissa is, and how she's been struggling with the move and the kids, and that I should be more understanding. He's talking like Melissa's some kind of saint who's just overwhelmed, and I'm the bad guy for not stepping up. I try to cut in, but he keeps going, saying how disappointed he is in me for not helping out more. I finally get a word in and tell him, "Dad, I have my own life. I can't just drop everything to babysit whenever Melissa wants me to." But he's not having it. He's saying stuff like, "That's what family's for. And you need to be there for your sister." That's when I snapped. I told him, "Melissa's not my responsibility. She's an adult, and if she can't handle her own kids, she needs to figure that out without dragging me into it." I said it calmly, but inside I was boiling. But then my dad hits me with something I wasn't expecting. He says, "If you don't start helping out more, I'm going to cut you off." Now, when I say cut off, it's not like my dad's been paying my bills or anything. I've been self-sufficient since I left for college. But we've always had this kind of unspoken thing where he'd help me out if I ever needed it. He paid for my car insurance, chipped in for my rent when I was struggling after graduation, that kind of stuff. So when he said cut you off, I knew he meant completely. No more help, no more financial support, nothing. At first I was in shock. I couldn't believe he was threatening me like that just because I wouldn't babysit for Melissa. Like, seriously? That's where we're at now? So I said, "Are you really cutting me off over babysitting?" And he didn't hesitate. "If you're not going to help your family, then yes." That's when I lost it. I said, "You know what? Fine, cut me off. I don't need your money. If this is how you're going to treat me, then maybe it's better that we don't talk." He went quiet for a second, like he didn't expect me to actually stand up for myself. But then he just sighed and said, "I'm really disappointed in you, Rachel. You've changed." Changed? I hadn't changed. I just finally reached my limit. I'd spent years watching Melissa get everything handed to her while I had to fight for scraps. And now I was being told I was selfish for not wanting to be her free babysitter? I didn't bother arguing anymore. I just said, "I'm done," and hung up. After the call, I felt a mix of things. Part of me was furious. Furious that my dad was so blind to what was happening. Furious that Melissa had manipulated the situation to make me look like the bad guy. But another part of me was just sad. Sad that my dad couldn't see how unfair he was being. Sad that I was losing what little relationship I had with him. I sat there for a while, trying to process everything. I thought about texting Melissa, trying to reason with her, but what was the point? She clearly didn't care about me or my boundaries. She just wanted what she wanted, and if I wasn't willing to give it to her, I was the bad guy. After a while, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me anymore. If my dad wanted to cut me off, fine. If Melissa wanted to cry about me not being her personal babysitter, she could do that. But I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. I turned off my phone, made myself some dinner, and decided I was done with the drama. If they wanted to talk, they could, but I wasn't going to chase after them. I thought that was the end of it. But of course, things were far from over. The very next day, I got a text from Melissa. It wasn't one of those passive-aggressive messages like she usually sends. Nope, this one was straight-up aggressive. She said something like, "I can't believe you turn your back on your family. You've always been selfish, and now you're showing your true colors. Don't bother coming around if you're not willing to help." Now, I don't know about you, but being called selfish by someone who's been using me as a free babysitter for weeks? That's rich. I was so done with her attitude, and I wasn't going to let her twist the narrative anymore. I texted back, telling her straight up, "I've helped you more than enough, and you've done nothing but take advantage of me. I'm not your babysitter. Find someone else." I was pissed, but at the same time, there was this weird sense of relief. Like finally, I was telling her what I should have said a long time ago. No more tiptoeing around her feelings. No more letting her walk all over me. I was done. But then something weird happened. Later that day, I got a call from one of my friends, Jessica. She sounded kind of awkward, like she didn't really want to talk to me about what she was about to say. She goes, "Hey, so I ran into Melissa earlier today at the mall, and she was with some guy." At first, I didn't think much of it. Melissa was married to Ben, so maybe she was just hanging out with a friend or something. But then Jessica kept talking. She didn't see me, but they were acting really close, like too close. They were holding hands, and I'm pretty sure they kissed. I froze. What? Melissa, the same Melissa who had been making me feel like crap for not helping with her kids, was out at the mall with some dude behind Ben's back? I couldn't believe it. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but Jessica wasn't the type to lie or exaggerate. She was just as shocked as I was. I thanked Jessica for telling me and hung up, my mind racing. I started replaying everything in my head. The sudden need for me to babysit all the time, the random errands she always had to run. It all started to click. She wasn't overwhelmed or struggling with being a mom. She was using me to watch her kids so she could sneak around with this guy. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Here I was, feeling guilty for not helping her, feeling like maybe I was in the wrong. And the whole time, she was just using me so she could cheat on her husband? I couldn't let this go. Ben was a good guy, and he didn't deserve to be treated like that. I wasn't about to sit back and let her get away with it. So I made a decision. I was going to expose her. The next time Melissa called asking me to babysit, I agreed. I wanted to catch her in the act, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. She dropped off Olivia and Max like usual, and I pretended everything was fine. But instead of staying home with the kids, I packed them up in my car and took them to Jessica's place. I knew they'd be safe there for a bit. Then I drove over to the mall where Jessica had seen Melissa and the mystery guy. I parked my car and waited. I didn't have to wait long. About half an hour later, I saw her walking out of the mall, arm in arm with the same guy Jessica had described. They looked way too cozy to be just friends. I snapped a few pictures from my car, enough to show what was going on, and left. I didn't confront her right then. I wanted to do this the right way, not some public scene that would just blow up in my face. When I got home, I sent the pictures to Ben. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him what I had found out, how Melissa had been using me to babysit so she could run around with this guy behind his back. It was probably one of the hardest texts I've ever had to send because I knew it was going to destroy him. But he deserved to know the truth. Ben didn't respond right away. I wasn't expecting him to. I couldn't even imagine what he was going through at that moment. I just hoped he didn't try to brush it off or make excuses for her. He was a good guy, and he didn't deserve to be treated like that. A couple of hours later, I finally got a reply. Ben thanked me for telling him. He said he was devastated, but also kind of suspected something was going on. He told me he was going to confront her that night. And oh man, did he confront her. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of texts from Melissa. She was furious. She accused me of ruining her life and sticking my nose where it didn't belong. She tried to twist everything, saying I was just bitter and jealous, and that I wanted to tear her family apart. It was wild. Like somehow I was the bad guy for telling the truth? I didn't even bother replying. There was nothing left to say. I knew what I did was the right thing, and no amount of guilt-tripping from Melissa was going to change that. Later that day, I got another text from my dad. He wasn't happy either. Apparently, Melissa had run to him, crying about how I had betrayed her and how I was trying to ruin her marriage. And of course, my dad took her side because why wouldn't he? He sent me this long text about how disappointed he was in me, how I should have stayed out of it, and how I wasn't acting like part of the family. That's when I realized there was no fixing this. My dad was never going to see things from my side. He was too far gone when it came to Melissa. I'd always be the selfish one in his eyes, no matter what I did. So I texted him back, short and simple. I said, if you can't see that I did the right thing, then maybe it's better we don't talk. And that was it. I cut him off. I cut Melissa off. I was done. Update. It wasn't even a full week after I exposed her to Ben that she started reaching out again. I was getting texts like, I know we've had our differences, but we're still family, and you can't just walk away from this. She was trying to guilt me, like always. It was the same old manipulative nonsense. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was just sorry she got caught. At first, I ignored it. I mean, what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't about to engage with someone who had used me and then turned the whole situation around to make me look like the bad guy. But she didn't let up. The texts kept coming, and then the calls started. She'd leave these long, rambling voicemails about how I'd destroyed her marriage and how she didn't know what to do without me. It was all so fake. She was trying to make me feel bad for standing up for myself, and honestly, I wasn't falling for it. But then, out of nowhere, Ben called me. Now, I hadn't really spoken to Ben since I sent him the photos of Melissa with the other guy. After that, I kind of just let him deal with his own stuff. I figured he needed time to process everything, and I didn't want to get involved in the aftermath. But when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I was kind of nervous. I wasn't sure if he was calling to thank me or if he was going to lash out. So I picked up, and to my surprise, Ben was actually calm, like really calm. He said, "Hey, I just wanted to say thank you." I was kind of thrown off. I didn't know what to expect, but thank you wasn't high on the list. He went on to explain that after I told him about Melissa's affair, he had confronted her, and everything came out. Melissa tried to lie at first, but when he showed her the photos, she couldn't keep up the act anymore. They had a huge fight, obviously, and she admitted to the whole thing. Ben told me he was filing for divorce, and honestly, it was a long time coming. I didn't know what to say. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I was glad he was finally standing up for himself too. He deserved better than what Melissa had put him through. Ben told me that he was planning to move out of the city, take the kids, and start fresh somewhere else. He didn't want them to be around all the drama, and he didn't trust Melissa to put their needs first. I didn't blame him. After everything she'd done, it was clear she only cared about herself. We talked for a bit longer, and then he said something that stuck with me. "You did the right thing, Rachel. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." And honestly, that's exactly what I needed to hear. For so long, I had been doubting myself, wondering if I was the problem, if I was being too harsh. But hearing Ben say that, hearing him thank me for exposing the truth, made me realize I wasn't the villain in this story. I was just someone who had finally had enough. After I hung up with Ben, I felt lighter, like I could finally breathe again. But of course, things weren't completely over. Melissa wasn't done yet. She kept trying to reach out, sending texts, leaving voicemails. She even tried to show up at my apartment a couple of times, but I wasn't having it. I blocked her number and told the building manager not to let her in. I was done with the drama, and I wasn't going to let her guilt me into coming back into her mess. The final straw, though, was when my dad tried to get involved again. I hadn't spoken to him since our last argument, but one night, out of the blue, he called me. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. In it, he sounded, well, desperate, honestly. He was going on about how family is everything, and how he didn't want to lose me. He kept saying how Melissa was going through a rough time, and how I should try to be more understanding. I listened to that voicemail, and something just clicked for me. My dad wasn't ever going to change. He was always going to put Melissa first, no matter what. He was always going to make excuses for her, and I was always going to be the one on the outside, looking in. I realized that I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life anymore. So I made a decision. I called him back. When he picked up, I kept it simple. I told him that I loved him, but I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep being the one who had to sacrifice my own peace of mind just to keep the family together. I told him that if he couldn't respect my boundaries and see things from my perspective, then maybe it was better if we didn't talk for a while. He tried to argue, but I didn't let him. I told him I wasn't mad anymore. I was just tired. I was tired of being the one who always had to bend, who always had to give in. I was done. And that was it. After that call, I cut off contact with both my dad and Melissa. I know it sounds harsh, but it's what I had to do for my own sanity. Sometimes you just have to walk away, even if it's from family. Now, it's been a few months since all of this went down, and I'm in a much better place. I've got my peace back. I've got my life back. I'm no longer dealing with the constant drama, the manipulation, the guilt trips. I've started focusing on myself and my own happiness, and honestly, it feels pretty damn good. Sure, I miss my dad sometimes, but I don't miss the stress that came with him. And as for Melissa, well, I haven't heard from her since, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Sometimes you just have to choose yourself.